When the story of Ruth is read slowly, another pattern begins to appear beneath the surface of the narrative. What first seems like the simple story of a widow gleaning in a field gradually reveals the quiet movement of a bride drawing closer to the one who will redeem her. At the beginning, Ruth stands at the very edge of the field. She arrives in Bethlehem as a stranger from the nations, a woman with no claim to land, no inheritance, and no place among the households of Israel. Her first step into the story is humble. She asks permission to gather the grain left behind by the harvesters. She begins as a gleaner. In the fields of ancient Israel, gleaners did not walk among the sheaves with the reapers. They followed at a distance, collecting what had fallen to the ground. Ruth moves carefully through the field, gathering what remains after the harvest. Yet even in this first step, something begins to shift. Boaz notices her. The Redeemer sees the woman who has entered his field, and he asks the overseer of the harvest who she is. When he hears the story of Ruth, who left her homeland to seek refuge among the people of Israel, Boaz speaks words of blessing over her. He tells her to remain in his field and not to go elsewhere. Protection is extended over her, and the workers are instructed not to trouble her. The distance between the gleaner and the lord of the field begins to close. Soon, Ruth is invited to draw even nearer. At the time of the meal, Boaz tells her to come and sit with the workers. Bread is placed in her hands, and roasted grain is offered to her from the table of the Redeemer. The woman who arrived as a stranger now eats within the household circle. The story's movement continues quietly. Ruth works in the field until the harvest is finished. She gathers grain day after day under the watchful kindness of Boaz. What began as a widow's survival slowly becomes something more. Favor rests upon her, and the Redeemer himself ensures that she gathers freely among the sheaves. But the turning point of the story has not yet arrived. Naomi, who understands the order of redemption within Israel, sees the unfolding events and recognizes that the moment has come for a deeper step. She instructs Ruth to go to the threshing floor at night, where Boaz will rest after the harvest. The threshing floor stands at the center of Bethlehem's agricultural world. It is the place where the grain is gathered and where the wind separates the wheat from the chaff. What is valuable remains. What is empty is carried away. When Ruth arrives there, the story reaches its most delicate moment. In the quiet darkness of the night, she approaches Boaz and asks him to spread his covering over her. The request is both humble and profound. She is asking the Redeemer to take his place as the household's protector and to restore the inheritance that had been lost. Boaz understands the meaning of her words, yet the path to redemption is not entirely clear. Another relative stands closer in the order of inheritance, and the matter must be resolved before the elders of the town. Still, Boaz assures Ruth that he will not rest until the question is settled. Before she leaves the threshing floor, he places a gift into her cloak, 6 measures of barley. The gesture carries a quiet significance. Throughout the scriptures, 6 often represents work that has begun but has not yet reached its completion. The 7th step brings rest and fulfillment. The gift of 6 measures becomes a sign that the work of redemption is already moving forward, yet the final moment has not yet arrived. When Ruth returns to Naomi with the grain, Naomi immediately understands the message. The Redeemer will settle the matter that very day. And so the story moves to its final place, the city gate. In the life of ancient Israel, the gate of the town was the place where legal matters were decided and where witnesses gathered to confirm agreements. Boaz sits there and waits for the nearer relative to pass by. When the man arrives, the matter of redemption is presented before him. At first, he is willing to redeem the land belonging to Naomi's household. But when he learns that the redemption also requires raising the deceased's name through marriage to Ruth, he steps aside. The right of redemption passes to Boaz. Before the elders of Bethlehem, he declares that he will redeem the inheritance and take Ruth as his wife. The elders bless the union, speaking words that recall the mothers of Israel through whom the people multiplied in the land. In that moment, the final step of the story arrives. The gleaner becomes the bride. The Redeemer restores the household. The inheritance that seemed lost in exile is returned to the family. Soon, Naomi's quiet house is filled with new life. Ruth bears a son, and the women of Bethlehem gather around Naomi with words of joy. The one who once returned to Bethlehem in bitterness now holds a child in her arms. The child is named Obed. And the story that began with famine and widowhood reveals its deeper purpose. Obed becomes the father of Jesse, and Jesse becomes the father of David. From the fields of Bethlehem, the royal house begins to rise. When we look back over the movement of the story, the progression becomes clear. A woman enters the field as a stranger. The Redeemer notices her and extends favor. She is invited to share the household table. She approaches the threshing floor in humility. The covenant covering is requested. The matter of redemption is settled at the gate, and from that union a royal lineage is born. The quiet journey of Ruth reveals the path from outsider to bride, from loss to restoration, from gleaning at the edges of the field to standing within the house of the Redeemer. What began in the simplicity of the harvest ends with the rising of a kingdom in the land. When we follow the story's movement even more closely, another quiet pattern begins to emerge in Ruth's journey. The steps that bring her closer to the Redeemer are not sudden. They unfold gradually, almost gently, as though the narrative itself is guiding the reader through a path of approach. Ruth first appears at the edges of the field as one who gathers what remains after the harvesters have passed. She bends low to collect the scattered grain, walking behind the workers with humility and patience. In that moment, she does not yet stand within the household of the Redeemer. She walks among those who serve in the field, yet the Redeemer sees her. Boaz notices the quiet faithfulness of the woman who came from another land. He hears how she left her people and her homeland in order to walk beside Naomi and seek refuge among the people of Israel. His response is not distant or formal. Instead, he extends favor over her. He tells her to remain in his field. This invitation is the first sign that Ruth is no longer only a stranger. The field becomes a place of protection, a space where she may remain under the watch of the Redeemer. Soon after, another step unfolds. Boaz invites Ruth to sit at the table during the time of the meal. Bread is placed before her, and she eats in the presence of the Redeemer. The one who began at the edge of the harvest now shares in the provision of the household. The narrative moves forward again. Ruth continues working through the harvest season, gathering grain among the sheaves. Boaz instructs the young men not to hinder her, and even allows portions of grain to fall intentionally so that she may gather more freely. Favor follows her steps through the field. What began as survival slowly becomes belonging. Yet, the deepest moment of the story arrives later, when Naomi instructs Ruth to approach the threshing floor. The threshing floor stands at the center of the harvest world, where the gathered grain is separated and prepared. It is a place where what is valuable remains and what is empty is carried away by the wind. When Ruth arrives there at night, she approaches Boaz with humility and courage. She asks him to spread his covering over her, acknowledging him as the Redeemer who can restore the inheritance of the household. In that quiet moment, the story reveals its heart. The Redeemer does not turn her away. Instead, he promises to settle the matter of redemption and restore what had been lost. Before she leaves, he places the gift of grain into her cloak, sending her back with the assurance that the work has begun. From the threshing floor, the narrative moves toward the city gate. There, before the elders of Bethlehem, the matter is brought into the open. The nearer relative declines the responsibility of redemption, and the right passes to Boaz. In the presence of witnesses, the Redeemer confirms that he will restore the inheritance of Naomi's household and take Ruth as his wife. The progression that began at the edge of the field now reaches its fulfillment. The gleaner becomes the bride. The stranger becomes part of the household. The inheritance that seemed lost is restored. Soon a child is born, and the women of Bethlehem speak words that reveal how completely the story has been transformed. Naomi, who once believed her life had ended in emptiness, now holds new life in her arms. The child is Obed. From that child, the lineage of Jesse and David will arise, and the quiet fields of Bethlehem will one day be remembered as the place where the royal house began to grow. Through the story of Ruth, the Scriptures reveal a gentle but powerful truth. Redemption often unfolds through small and faithful steps. A stranger enters the field, the Redeemer notices her, favor opens the way, and covenant love restores what seemed beyond recovery. What began with loss and exile becomes the beginning of a royal future in the land. Another quiet detail within the story reveals an even deeper layer of meaning. When Ruth approaches Boaz at the threshing floor, her request is expressed in very specific language. She asks the Redeemer to spread his covering over her. In the ancient text, the word used for this covering carries a rich meaning. It can refer to the wing of a bird, the corner of a garment, or the protective covering placed over someone who belongs within a household. Earlier in the story, Boaz had already spoken words that echo this same image. When he first learned of Ruth and the journey she made from her homeland, he blessed her, saying that she had come to seek refuge under the wings of the God of Israel. Now the same language appears again. The woman who came seeking refuge under the wings of God asks the Redeemer to spread his own covering over her. The blessing spoken in the field begins to take visible form through the Redeemer's actions. In the life of Israel, the spreading of a garment over someone carried the meaning of protection and belonging. It signified that a person was being received under the authority and care of the household. Within the language of marriage, the covering represented the beginning of a covenant union. So when Ruth asks Boaz to spread his covering over her, she is not only asking for kindness, she is asking the Redeemer to receive her into the protection of his household and to restore the inheritance that had been lost. The request is bold, yet it is also an act of trust. Ruth does not demand redemption. She simply places herself before the Redeemer and acknowledges his authority to act. The moment reveals the quiet faith that has guided her journey since she first left the land of Moab. Boaz immediately recognizes the meaning of her request. Rather than rebuking her for approaching him at night, he praises her integrity and assures her that the matter will be resolved. He acknowledges the righteousness of her actions and promises that redemption will be brought to completion. In that moment, the image of the covering becomes a powerful symbol. The bride seeks refuge under the wings of God. The Redeemer spreads his covering over the bride. The household is restored. The language of wings and garments appears throughout the Scriptures as a sign of protection and covenant care. Those who dwell under the wings of the Almighty find refuge and belonging. In the story of Ruth, that same imagery becomes personal and visible through the Redeemer's actions. The woman who entered the land as a stranger now stands beneath the covering of the household. From that covering, a new future begins to grow. Soon, the house that once seemed empty will be filled with life again, and the lineage of the king will rise from the fields of Bethlehem. Through this quiet moment at the threshing floor, the story reveals once more how redemption often begins in humility, trust, and the willingness to seek refuge under the covering prepared by God. Another layer emerges when we look closely at the place where this story unfolds. The entire narrative of Ruth takes place in Bethlehem. The name of the town carries a meaning that ancient readers immediately recognized. Bethlehem means house of bread. It is a place associated with grain, harvest, and provisions from the land. Yet, when the story begins, the house of bread has no bread. A famine has fallen upon the land. Because of the famine, Naomi's family leaves Bethlehem and travels to a foreign country in search of food. What begins as a journey for survival soon becomes a story of loss. Naomi loses her husband, and her sons also die in a foreign land. When she finally returns to Bethlehem, she does not come back with abundance. She returns as a widow who believes that her life has been emptied. The house of bread has become a place of sorrow. Yet the moment Naomi and Ruth arrive, something begins to change. The text quietly tells us that they return at the beginning of the barley harvest. This small detail signals that the famine has ended. Grain is growing again in the fields surrounding Bethlehem. The land that once lacked bread now produces grain once more, and it is in those very fields that the story of redemption begins. Ruth enters Boaz's field during the harvest season. There she gathers barley among the sheaves and receives favor from the Redeemer. The harvest becomes the setting where the bride and the Redeemer meet. What began with famine slowly turns into provision. The house of bread begins to fill again, but the symbolism goes even deeper. Bethlehem will later become known as the city of David. From the union of Ruth and Boaz, the lineage of David begins to rise in that very town. So the place that once experienced famine becomes the birthplace of the royal house of Israel. The story reveals a beautiful reversal. Emptiness becomes fullness. Loss becomes restoration. Famine becomes harvest. And the house of bread becomes the place where the promise of the kingdom begins to grow. When we look back over the entire journey, the pattern becomes clear. A woman from the nations enters the land during the harvest. The Redeemer welcomes her into his field. Covenant love restores a broken household. And from that union, the royal lineage begins to rise in Bethlehem. The quiet fields surrounding the house of bread become the place where redemption takes root, where the bride finds her Redeemer, and where the future of the kingdom begins to unfold in the land. There is one more quiet voice in the story that reveals the depth of what has taken place. After Ruth gives birth, the women of Bethlehem gather around Naomi. These women had witnessed her return to the town years earlier when she came back from exile. They remembered how she had said that her life was empty and that bitterness had filled her heart. Now they see something entirely different. They see Naomi holding a child in her arms. The women speak words that carry a surprising weight of meaning. They say that Ruth, the daughter-in-law who has returned with Naomi, is better to her than 7 sons. In the language of ancient Israel, 7 represented fullness and completeness. To say that someone is better than 7 sons is to say that she brings a restoration beyond what could have been expected. The woman who came from another nation has become the source of fullness for the household. Through Ruth, the family line has been restored, and hope has returned to Bethlehem. The women place the child in Naomi's arms and declare that a Redeemer has been born to her household. The town that once witnessed Naomi's sorrow now witnesses the renewal of her life. The child is named Obed, and with that name, the quiet story of a widow and a gleaner reaches its final revelation. The child born in Bethlehem becomes the father of Jesse, and Jesse becomes the father of David. From the fields where the bride met the Redeemer, the royal house of Israel begins to rise. The story that began with famine and exile ends with restoration, covenant union, and the birth of a royal lineage in the house of bread. Thank you, family, for being here. If this teaching helped you, please like, comment, and share. It truly helps this message reach those who are seeking. To our new subscribers, welcome. And if you'd like to go deeper, we invite you to join as a member. The link is in the description and on our homepage. We are praying for you and standing with you in the light of Messiah, he and Messiah she. If you'd like to support the ministry, you can visit our store or bless our dear brother Michael via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description below, which also includes a link to our second store with new designs. Thank you for your love and encouragement, and stay tuned for the next video. May the spirit of wisdom and peace rest upon you always.